Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Spiral's Guardian: The Awakening of the Hunger. Act 1, The Cottage Beyond the Pines. Nestled deep beyond the old pine woods, where fog clung like lace to the forest floor, stood a cottage so well hidden that few would believe it existed. Not marked on any map nor passed down in local tales, it had become one with the land wrapped in ivy, shadowed by towering trees, and cradled in stillness. Here lived a young woman named Thessaly, not a recluse by intention, but a wanderer who had stopped wandering. After years adrift between cities and borrowed homes, she had found this hidden place by chance, or perhaps, as she sometimes whispered to herself, by invitation. The cottage had greeted her with an unlocked door, a hearth ready to spark, and a lingering scent of something sweet like cedar and cloves, as though someone had just stepped out for a moment. No one ever returned for it. In the year since, Thessaly had claimed the house not with ownership but with rhythm. She swept the old floors, repaired broken windows with glass from a sunken greenhouse nearby, and cultivated a quiet life among the trees. She didn't seek to tame the forest, only to listen to it. And in doing so, the forest began to speak back. The morning sun, slow and golden, filtered through gaps in the canopy. It touched her cheek like an old friend as she sat by the windowsill with a steaming cup of nettle and lemon balm tea in hand. The scent calmed her, as did the rising chorus of forest birds announcing another day. Outside, the woods awakened in soft motion. Tiny flickers of movement: a squirrel darting across moss, a robin tugging a worm from the earth, dewdrops sliding from petals, each were moments she had come to cherish. But today felt different. Thessaly had dreamt the night before of footsteps in the trees, not human but heavy and slow, like something ancient returning from a long slumber. She pulled on her woolen shawl, woven with constellation-like patterns from her grandmother's time, and stepped onto the wooden porch. The air smelled like petrichor, the scent of earth after rain, though it hadn't rained for 2 days. A strange coolness lingered, and a hush had settled over the pines. "Something is watching," she said aloud, not with fear, but a strange reverence. In the clearing before her, mist coiled low to the ground, parting in small waves as though someone or something had walked through it moments ago. She squinted, heart steady, but alert. Thessaly was not easily spooked. She had seen shadows in her past, shadows that wore suits, promises, and crooked smiles. The forest, even haunted, felt more honest than that. She reached for the small leather-bound journal she kept by the door, a habit she'd formed since moving here. Each day, she'd write down something she noticed, something she questioned, and something she remembered. A ritual of noticing. Today's entry, written in looping, careful script. The wind feels like breath today. And the trees have gone quiet. Thessaly followed the faint trail that led from her porch into the woods, a narrow winding path, once used by deer, now worn by her own bare feet. Leaves crackled beneath her step as she moved past ferns and lichens, past the twisted remains of a tree struck by lightning the previous autumn. Something about the air shifted again, not dangerous, but expectant. As though the forest was holding its breath. She came to the edge of a small stream that had appeared in spring. It hadn't been there the previous year, yet now flowed as if it had always belonged. Kneeling, she dipped her fingers into the water. It was colder than it should have been. As she stood, a shimmer caught her eye, not from the stream, but behind it. There, nestled between two ancient stones, was something she hadn't seen before, a pendant. Oval, pale silver, etched with a spiral and half buried in moss. Thessaly hesitated, then reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the metal, a sound echoed through the trees, low, resonant, like a bell rung underwater. The mist thickened. The birds fell silent. She clutched the pendant in one hand and turned back toward the cottage, but a part of her knew the quiet life she had built was already shifting. Something had found her, or maybe, it had always been there, waiting for her to notice. That night, as darkness spread like ink across the sky, Thessaly lit a single candle and wrote again in her journal. Her handwriting was shakier than usual. There is something beneath the pines. Watching. Remembering. And now, waking. She placed the pendant on her bedside table, beside a half-burnt lavender bundle and a feather sheet once found on the highest peak of the old pine. The shadows outside her window danced longer than usual, and the trees no longer whispered. They listened. Act 2, the spiral mark and the silence of birds. The morning after was not like the ones Thessaly had grown used to. There was no birdsong. No rustle of leaves, no squirrel chatter, no soft hum of life stirring beneath branches. Instead, the forest felt held in suspension like a painting of itself, still and soundless. Thessaly stood on the porch with her cup of tea untouched, the steam curling upward like questions unspoken. Her eyes were drawn not to the trees or the sky, but to the pendant she had placed on the window sill. Even now, it seemed to pulse faintly, not with light but with a strange presence. She picked it up again, running her thumb across the spiral engraving. The symbol was elegant, simple, and yet something about it stirred a memory that wasn't quite hers. A whisper, not spoken aloud but felt deep inside. Remember the turning. Remember the crossing. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it as the residue of a strange dream. But Thessaly knew herself too well. She was not prone to fantasy. Her feet were firm on the ground, even if her soul wandered among the stars. Pulling her shawl tighter, she walked the perimeter of her cottage, eyes scanning the earth. That's when she saw them, footprints, barely visible, pressed into the moist soil just beyond her herb garden. Not human. Too wide, too deep, too deliberate. She followed the trail, heart thudding like distant thunder. The prints led her to the same path she had walked the day before, but now each step forward seemed to echo. And the forest, still silent, felt like it was watching through every leaf and stone. At the stream, the water had changed. It now flowed in a perfect circle, not natural spiraling, as if mimicking the design on the pendant. She knelt again, dipping her fingers in. A flicker of something, a vision, a memory, rushed through her. A tall stone arch in the woods, covered in ivy. A door without a handle. The scent of burning leaves. A voice saying, "Some doors open only when the forest forgets your name." She gasped, pulling her hand back. The vision vanished. Later that day, Thessaly sat in her cottage, poring through an old chest of books she had found in the attic months ago. Most were about herbs, stars, and local lore. But buried beneath them all was a leather tome titled The Last Whisperers, a name she didn't recognize, though something inside her stirred with familiarity. Opening it, she found the same spiral etched onto the first page. Beneath it, a sentence written in delicate ink. "The forest remembers the ones who listen. And it hides the paths only for those who try to forget." Page after page spoke of places lost between times, of forest guardians, of stones that marked boundaries not between lands, but between memories and dreams. And woven into these writings, entries like a journal, authored by someone named Sorrel, were warnings of a creature that watched, waited, and followed those who disturbed the spiral. She felt a chill run down her spine. As dusk approached, she walked back outside and placed the pendant in the center of a small circle of stones she had arranged long ago, a place she used for grounding, for centering herself. She didn't know why she felt the urge to do it. It simply felt right. That night, as candlelight flickered against her wooden walls, Thessaly dreamed again. But this time, she saw herself as a child, running through a forest that looked like this one, only older, wilder. Behind her, a shadow followed. And as she turned, the shadow took shape, not monstrous, but familiar. Her own face, older, wiser, with silver in her hair and the pendant at her throat. The vision self whispered, "The spiral is not a path. It's a memory loop. You've been here before." Thessaly awoke with her heart racing, her hands clenched, and the distinct feeling that time had begun to twist around her. She opened her journal, hands trembling slightly, and wrote, "The birds have not sung today. The spiral has awakened something in me. Or perhaps I have awakened it." Act 3, The Arch of Ivy and the Forgotten Name. Morning brought with it a fragile quiet, the kind that felt borrowed, temporary, like a held breath before a storm. The forest had not returned to its usual melody. Even the wind moved reluctantly, brushing against the trees with hesitation. Thessaly woke with the image of the stone arch burned into her thoughts. It had been vivid in her dream, impossibly vivid. A part of her doubted it was merely a vision. Somewhere deep in the woods, that arch existed. She could feel it. With her journal tucked under one arm and the pendant hanging from a twine around her neck, she packed a satchel, a canteen of water, a small loaf of rosemary bread, a compass, though it never worked properly this deep in the woods, and the old tome The Last Whisperers. Something told her today would not be a simple walk. She followed the stream again, tracing the spiral flow. The prints she had seen the day before were gone, washed clean. Or perhaps, hidden. She moved deeper into the forest than ever before, past fallen logs and stone circles cloaked in moss, until even her cottage felt like a distant memory. Then, suddenly, she saw it. The arch. Half swallowed by the earth and wrapped in ivy thicker than her arm, it stood crooked and ancient between two leaning ash trees. The stone shimmered faintly, as though it were more spirit than structure. Carved into the curve of the arch were words in a language she didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. Beyond this veil, memory bends. She reached out to touch the stone, and in that instant, her surroundings dimmed, not darker, but quieter. The kind of quiet that made her feel like she'd stepped outside of time. Then a voice spoke behind her. Not loud, not hostile. Just clear. You should not have found this place yet. Thessaly spun around. A man stood several paces away, cloaked in bark-toned robes. His face was partially hidden beneath a hood, but his eyes were ancient, not in years, but in depth. Like someone who had watched too many lives go by. Who are you? Thessaly asked, clutching the pendant. He tilted his head. A caretaker. Like you, once. I'm not a. He raised a hand. You are. Though you've forgotten. The spiral chose you before you chose this forest. Thessaly's heart beat faster. What is the spiral? The spiral is not a thing, the man said. It's a rhythm. A turning. A return. This forest remembers everything and it never lets go of those it has claimed. She glanced back at the arch. What's through there? Not a place. A moment. One you've already lived, and one you've yet to face. He took a step closer, and she noticed the pendant around his neck identical to hers. I was the last, he said. Before the forest closed the door. And now? Now, it opens again. Because you remembered. Before she could ask more, he reached into his cloak and pulled out a small key made of bone and silver. He placed it in her hand. It was warm. When the forest is silent, it is listening. When it listens long enough. Doors open. He turned and walked into the trees, fading like mist. Thessaly stood there, breath held, pulse racing. She looked down at the key. The spiral pattern was carved into the handle. She turned toward the arch, reached for the ivy, and began to clear it away, each strand unwinding like memory, each pull revealing more of the stone beneath. It took hours, but eventually, the entire arch stood bare. In its center, the air shimmered like heat over summer stones. She stepped closer. The pendant around her neck began to hum, and her fingers tingled against the key. With a deep breath, she placed the key against the stone, even though there was no keyhole. Instead, the stone rippled. A whisper rushed through her mind, ancient and layered with many voices. To pass is to remember. To remember is to begin again. And then with a sound like a sigh exhaled from the earth, the arch opened. Not outward. Inward. She saw light. Then shadow. Then something she couldn't describe, a moment suspended in memory, waiting to be walked through. She stepped forward. Behind her, the forest stirred. Act 4, the forest between moments. The sensation of crossing through the arch was unlike anything Thessaly had ever experienced. There was no sound, no light, no cold, no heat. Just motion, not forward or backward, but inward, as if the very core of her being were folding into itself. She felt time peel away like old bark. Images, long buried, flickered in her mind, a boy with eyes the color of storms, a ring of stones glowing in moonlight, fire climbing the trunks of whispering trees. And then stillness. When she opened her eyes, the world had changed. She stood in a forest that looked almost identical to the one she knew, but not quite. The trees were taller, their bark smooth like glass. The leaves above glowed faintly, casting gentle hues of green and violet light. Mist floated in soft columns through the air, curling around her legs like curious creatures. The sky overhead shimmered in shades she couldn't name, colors that seemed to hum with memory. This was not a place. It was a when. She reached for her journal instinctively. It was still there, pressed against her side, though the pages now felt warmer, alive somehow. She opened it to find the words she'd written that morning were glowing faintly, as if infused with some deeper energy. The pendant around her neck pulsed once, gently. She turned slowly, taking in this new reality. Behind her, the stone arch stood untouched, no longer overgrown, but gleaming, clean, new. The spiral engraved into its crown rotated ever so slightly, like a turning eye. It wasn't just a symbol. It was alive. It watched. Thessaly took a step forward. The ground beneath her feet felt softer, almost breathing. Moss that shimmered like starlight carpeted the path, and as she moved deeper into the mirrored forest, she began to notice things, flickers of motion at the edges of her vision, whispers that came not from mouths but from memory. Then she saw it, a child, standing still in the clearing ahead. A girl, barefoot, with hair the same midnight hue as Thessaly's. The girl turned slowly, and Thessaly's breath caught in her throat. It was her. Or rather, it was the version of her that had once run through meadows, fearless and laughing, before life had layered her in silence and solitude. The child looked at her without surprise. "Do you remember this place?" the girl asked. Thessaly shook her head, but the answer came anyway. Yes. You used to come here in your dreams. You left messages for yourself. Do you want to see them? Before Thessaly could answer, the girl turned and began to walk, not waiting, not asking. Thessaly followed, the forest bending slightly with each step, as though the very reality of this world acknowledged the presence of its two travelers. They came to a wide circle of stones, 12 of them each etched with a different phase of the moon. At the center stood a tree unlike any Thessaly had ever seen, silver bark, leaves like feathers, branches that reached in spirals upward and downward at once. The girl gestured to the tree. Touch it? Thessaly stepped forward, placing her hand on the cool bark. The moment skin met tree, her mind was flooded. Memories poured through her, but not only her own. She saw a woman in crimson robes singing to stars. A man with spiral tattoos painting a door with symbols made of ash. A group of people seated in a circle, each holding a pendant like hers, chanting words that turned to vines in the air. And she saw herself, over and over, in different forms, different times, always standing at a threshold, always the same question in her heart. Am I ready to remember? She stumbled back, gasping. The child version of her simply watched. You were one of them, the girl said. The spiral keepers. The ones who remember when others forget. But you turned away. Why? Thessaly whispered. Because remembering hurts. Because knowing comes with sacrifice. But it's time now. Thessaly looked down at her hands. They were glowing faintly, as though the memories were rewriting something within her. She felt lighter. And heavier. Alive, but haunted. The child stepped closer. There's more. You haven't seen the beginning. Then show me, Thessaly said. The child reached into the air and pulled. Reality bent like silk, folding outward. Through the rippling veil, Thessaly saw a vast library, its shelves made of vines and roots, its books grown from bark and petal. She stepped through. The air in the library buzzed softly. Whispers curled around her ears, pages turning, names being spoken, stories being rewritten in real time. In the center of the library stood a mirror. But not a mirror of glass, this was water suspended in air, rippling gently. Thessaly approached. Her reflection looked back, but it was not her present self. It was the woman from her visions. Older. Stronger. Eyes that had seen too much. She's you, the child said. No. She's who I was meant to become. The child smiled, not sweetly, but solemnly. You still can. But first you must remember what you forgot. And you must face what waits beyond the second arch. Thessaly turned sharply. There's another arch. Yes. At the edge of this memory. Beyond it is the wound. Thessaly's breath caught. The wound. The reason you left. The moment you sealed away. It's waiting. And it's waking. The spiral on her pendant pulsed more brightly now. The library began to fade, the forest returning around her. The child was gone. She stood alone in the clearing once more, the tree still shimmering, the 12 stones humming faintly. And far in the distance, beyond the shimmer of time, she could feel it, the second arch, calling her. She opened her journal and wrote. This place is not a dream. It's a reckoning. The forest remembers me. And now, I must remember it. Act 5, The Wound Beneath the Roots. The forest had changed again. Thessaly could feel it in the way the wind moved, hesitant, like breath drawn in but never released. The trees were older now, even though their shapes had not changed. Their branches curled tighter, their leaves shimmered with strange patterns. The mist was deeper, tinged in hues of rust and violet. Every sound, every silence, felt like it carried meaning. She had crossed back from the mirror library, but something had stayed behind or perhaps followed her. The pendant at her chest now pulsed not gently, but insistently. Its spiral glowed a dull red, like embers stirred from long-forgotten fire. The path she walked was not one she had seen before, yet her feet moved with certainty, as if drawn by gravity stronger than her will. The journal in her satchel had changed, too. Pages turned themselves now, revealing fragments of words written in her own hand, words she had no memory of ever writing. Don't look directly at the arch. The wound is memory devouring itself. Some truths come with teeth. She whispered aloud, to the trees or to herself. She no longer knew the difference. Where are you leading me? The forest answered with a sound like roots shifting deep beneath the earth. Then, she saw it. The second arch. Unlike the first, this one was fractured. One half of its stone frame had crumbled, the spiral symbol broken in two, like a forgotten name half spoken. But even so, it shimmered with power. It bled mist from its center, and the air around it pulsed like a living wound. Thessaly stood still, her pulse sinking with the rhythm of the spiral. She felt it before she saw it, a memory crawling toward her from the far end of the arch. Not a vision. Not a dream. A moment. She saw herself, years younger, standing beside a figure. A man. His face was blurred by time, but his voice rang out clear. Don't open it. You know what waits there. And her voice sharp, defiant. I have to. You don't see what it's doing. The forest is changing. Something is feeding on the forgetting. She saw herself stepping through the broken arch, and then everything fractured. A flash. A scream. The forest burning. A circle of whisperers falling to their knees. The spiral collapsing. And then darkness. The vision faded, leaving Thessaly trembling, her knees weak. The arch before her pulsed again, this time whispering her name in 100 voices. Thessaly. 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 She stepped forward. The pendant grew hot, almost searing. Her breath caught in her throat. Still, she didn't stop. The air inside the arch was thick, like walking through bloodied water. Each step pulled at her limbs, memories peeling back from her bones. She felt herself becoming transparent, as if this space was rewriting her into the person she had been when she last walked here. And then silence. She stood in the center of the wound. It was a clearing, but nothing like the others. The trees here were dead, their bark blackened, twisted like limbs frozen in agony. The ground cracked beneath her feet. In the center of the clearing stood a stone basin, half filled with water so dark it seemed bottomless. Around it, bones. Not animal. Not quite human. She approached the basin. Her reflection looked back. But it wasn't just her face, it was every version of her. All layered together. All screaming without sound. She reached into the water. The cold pierced her, not her skin, but her memory slicing through decades, centuries, lives layered like sediment. And then she remembered. The truth. She had been a spiral keeper. Not the last. But the one who broke the cycle. There had been a decision. A ritual to seal away something ancient, not a beast, but a force, the hunger of the spiral. A remnant of the forest's original mind, twisted by centuries of forgotten pain. The keepers had bound it using memory, offering parts of themselves to weave a cage. And Thessaly had broken that cage. Not out of malice. Out of love. The man in her vision, his name was Kale, had been fading, devoured by the hunger. To save him, Thessaly had turned against the spiral. She had unraveled part of the memory web, hoping to buy him time. But it had not been enough. The hunger escaped. Kale was lost. The forest bled. And she had fled, sealing her own memories behind layers of forgetting, living in solitude to keep from remembering what she had done. Tears spilled from her eyes as the memory consumed her. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. And the spiral answered. Not with forgiveness. With invitation. The air thickened. The basin glowed. From the shadows of the clearing, a form began to rise. Not Kale. But what remained of him. Twisted. Hollow. Remembered only as pain. Thessaly, the voice gurgled. "You left me." She staggered back. "I didn't know, I thought I could." "You unmade the spiral for me. And now, you will remake it?" The forest trembled. The basin shattered. The sky cracked above. And in her chest, the pendant pulsed violently, not with fear, with choice. She could run again. Forget. Sleepwalk through another cycle. Or she could remember, fully accept the wound, face the hunger, and begin the spiral anew. Her hand closed around the pendant. She took a breath. I will not forget again. Act 6, The Rebirth of the Spiral. The world around Thessaly collapsed, not in a literal sense, but in a deeper, more visceral way. The ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone, distorting the reality she had come to know. The tree in the center of the clearing, the one that had once been the heart of the spiral, was now a twisted, blackened remnant of its former self. Its branches writhed, as though fighting to remember their original shape, but the very air tasted of decay. The figure before her, Kale, or what had once been Kale, stood now as a grotesque shadow of himself. His once warm, steady eyes were hollow, void of humanity. His body was twisted, made of broken memories and pain, a horrific manifestation of everything Thessaly had unwittingly released into the forest when she chose to break the spiral. Do you remember me, Thessaly? The figure rasped, his voice distorted as if spoken underwater. Thessaly stepped back, heart pounding in her chest. Her hands shook violently as the pendant around her neck pulsed, burning against her skin. I remember you, she whispered. But you're not him. You're the hunger. The creature, Kale's broken form, tilted his head, a sound like cracking wood echoing from his mouth. Yes, I am the hunger. I am what remains of him. And you. You are the one who set me free. The words tore through her, each one an accusation, each one a weight too heavy for her to bear. She had been trying so hard to forget, to run, to bury the past, but now it was back, and it was asking for payment. For justice. For the end of the spiral she had started but could never finish. She turned away, her breath shallow, her chest tightening. I didn't know, she pleaded. I thought I was saving you. I thought if I gave up my memory, I could fix it. I didn't know it would make it worse. The twisted Kale extended a hand, fingers like blackened branches reaching for her. You did know. You always knew. The forest never forgets, Thessaly. It only waits. And now, it has come for you. Thessaly closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could hear the voice of the child from earlier, the version of herself that had spoken to her through the forest. The spiral is not a path. It's a memory loop. You've been here before. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't see the twisted, broken form of Kale. She saw him as he had been before the hunger took hold, his smile, his warmth, the man she had once loved. The man she had tried to save. But she had failed him, She could feel the weight of that failure deep in her chest, a hollow ache that reverberated through every part of her being. And in that moment, Thessaly made a decision. She reached out and grasped the pendant around her neck, feeling its heat surge through her. "I will fix it," she said softly, the words almost a vow. "I will make things right. Even if it means facing what I have forgotten. Even if it means facing the pain of the spiral." The forest seemed to hold its breath. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the air around her thick with the tension of 1,000 lost memories. She closed her eyes once more, pulling the pendant tight in her hand, and whispered into the silence. "I choose to remember." And with those words, the world around her seemed to shift. The ground beneath her feet cracked open like a wound, revealing an abyss of swirling blackness. The trees above groaned, their branches reaching for the sky in desperate, skeletal motions. The wind howled through the clearing, carrying with it the voices of the past, of those she had lost, of those she had failed, of the forest that had once been her sanctuary. But Thessaly stood firm. She had made her choice. And as the abyss began to swallow the clearing, she stepped forward. The world fractured once more, and she fell. She awoke with a sharp gasp, as if the world had been pulled from under her feet. The ground was solid beneath her, and the air was cool and heavy. She was no longer in the twisted, decaying forest. Instead, she stood in a vast, open field. The sky above was infinite, dotted with stars that shone like forgotten dreams. There was no more pain, no more hunger. For a brief, fleeting moment, Thessaly felt at peace. But then she remembered. The spiral. The wound. The choices she had made. And as she took a step forward, she realized that the spiral had not disappeared. It had not been fixed. It had only been paused. The true test, the final reckoning, was still ahead of her. The field began to blur, and she felt the pull of the forest again. The trees called to her, their roots deep in the earth, waiting for her return. She knew what she had to do. Thessaly closed her eyes and focused, summoning every ounce of her will. She reached deep within herself, pulling the threads of memory together, binding them into a single point of light. With a final breath, she stepped into the darkness once more. This time, when she entered the forest again, she didn't feel the weight of the past. She didn't feel the burden of the spiral. She felt alive. Whole. Ready. The arch stood before her, its spiral now unbroken, its power restored. The forest had healed itself, and now it awaited its keeper. And Thessaly knew, without a doubt, that this time, she would not break the spiral. She would bind it, protect it, and make it whole again, not just for herself, but for the forest, for the future, and for all the lives she had touched. The memory of the hunger, the wound, the pain, it would not vanish. But it would no longer define her. She had become something more. Something stronger. And as she stood before the arch, ready to embrace her fate, the forest whispered once more. The spiral is reborn. Act 7, The Keeper's Choice. The forest stretched endlessly before Thessaly. Its ancient trees whispered, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, begging for release from their centuries-old burden. The ground beneath her feet seemed to thrum with the pulse of the spiral, its power flowing through the roots, through the stones, through the very air around her. The weight of the forest's watchful presence settled on her shoulders as she approached the arch once more. The spiral etched into the stone gleamed with a soft, radiant light, no longer cracked, no longer broken. It was whole, but she knew that it was not just the arch that had healed. The spiral itself had been mended by her choices, by her willingness to face the darkness of the hunger and the wound she had created. Yet, it was still not enough. The forest was still not at peace. Thessaly stepped forward, feeling the hum of the spiral resonate within her chest. She reached for the pendant around her neck, now cool and steady, its spiral marking the path she had walked, the path that was not yet complete. The air around her thickened. A presence, older and deeper than anything she had encountered before, pressed into her consciousness. It was not an external force, not the twisted form of Kale or the hunger. It was the essence of the spiral itself, the very core of the forest that had awaited its keeper's return. "You have mended what was broken, Keeper," the voice echoed in her mind. But the spiral is not simply healed by remembering. It is not only a matter of time, but of choice. You must choose what it shall become. Thessaly froze, the weight of those words sinking deep into her heart. What the spiral had once been a system of balance, a force of nature binding memories, truth, and the passage of time had been shattered by her own hands. And now, she was being asked to rebuild it. But not as it had been. Not as it should have been. The choices she had made in the past, the sacrifices, the broken promises, the love she had lost had shaped the spiral, warped it. It was no longer a cycle of balance. It had become something else, something dangerous. And now, as its keeper, it was up to her to decide what it would become in the future. She stood still for a long moment, allowing the weight of her responsibility to settle around her. She could feel the forest's breath, the pull of the ancient trees, the calling of the spiral itself. "Choose," the voice urged, gentle yet insistent. Shall the spiral be reborn as it once was, a force of balance, binding the past to the present? Or shall you choose to remake it, to reshape it into something new? Something beyond memory, beyond the cycle. But know this, Keeper, the choice you make will shape all that comes after. Thessaly's heart pounded in her chest. The choice was hers. She could restore the spiral to its original state, bound by memory, by ritual, by law. She could bring back the balance that had once existed, the quiet order that had ruled the forest. Or she could break free from that cycle, reshape the spiral into something else, something new, something unpredictable. And yet, deep down, Thessaly knew that no matter what she chose, the forest would never be the same. The damage had already been done. The hunger that had once been unleashed could never be fully undone. The memories she had erased, the ones she had tried to bury, would never fade. They were a part of her now, just as the spiral was. With a deep breath, Thessaly closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the pendant. She focused, drawing on every ounce of strength, every scrap of memory, every piece of love and loss that had brought her here. The forest, the spiral, and the choices she had made, they were all part of her. It was time to stop running, to stop hiding from what she had done. She opened her eyes and stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke. I choose to reshape the spiral. The air around her trembled, the trees groaning as if in response to her words. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing a swirling abyss. The forest held its breath as Thessaly took one final step into the unknown. The spiral was not just a cycle of memory, of time, of balance. It was a living, breathing thing, and it had a future, just as Thessaly did. The spiral will no longer be bound by the past, she whispered, her words carrying through the forest like the first breath of spring. It will no longer be a cage. It will be free. Free to grow. Free to evolve. Free to choose its path, just as we must. The ground beneath her feet shattered, and the forest trembled with the force of her declaration. The air crackled with power, the energy of the spiral shifting and reshaping itself, as if it were awakening from a long slumber. The trees swayed, their branches reaching toward the sky, their leaves glowing with the promise of a new beginning. And then, with a sudden, deafening silence, the world around her settled. The spiral had been reborn not as it was, not as it should have been, but as it would become. Thessaly stood alone in the clearing, the pendant cool against her chest. The forest had changed. The spiral had changed. And now, it was time for her to change as well. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the forest's gaze upon her. The choice had been made. The future had been rewritten. And now, it was time for her to embrace whatever came next. The trees whispered, their voices soft and ancient, as the forest began to heal once more. Act 8, The Unraveling of Time. The forest had gone silent. It was the kind of silence that clung to the skin, the kind that made the air feel too thick to breathe. Thessaly stood at the center of the clearing, her heart racing as the weight of her choice settled around her like a cloak of stone. The spiral, once a rigid structure binding the past, the present, and the future, had been broken, reshaped. It was free, now. Free to grow, evolve, and breathe as it would. But freedom had its price. The trees above her no longer whispered, their leaves hanging motionless. The air had thickened with tension, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for the consequences of Thessaly's decision to unfold. She glanced at the pendant around her neck. The spiral had changed, too. It no longer pulsed with the fiery red of the hunger. Now, it glowed softly with a silver light, a gentle, steady glow that seemed to echo the very core of the spiral she had remade. But the light was faint, and in the stillness, it felt fragile, like something on the verge of breaking. Is this really the way forward? She whispered to no one, the question hanging heavy in the air. As if in answer, the forest shifted. The ground trembled beneath her feet, the roots of the trees groaning as if something beneath the earth was stirring. She had expected change, but not like this. She had hoped for rebirth, for healing, but what if, instead, she had unleashed something worse? Was freedom truly worth the price? Thessaly took a deep breath and stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the earth. Every step she took seemed to send ripples through the air, the very fabric of the forest trembling around her. The trees leaned toward her, their branches now twisted and warped, their bark cracked like old parchment. She had reshaped the spiral, yes. But she had not anticipated the force she was awakening. The forest, the spiral itself, was alive, and now that it was no longer bound by memory and time, it was as much a force of chaos as of order. She had hoped to create something beautiful, but what if this was its true nature? A thing untamed, uncontrolled. No. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. There was no turning back. The ground shook again, more violently this time. The trees groaned, their roots twisting and pushing upward, as if trying to escape their ancient prison. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, of decay, of something old stirring deep beneath the surface. And then, she saw it. A figure. At first, it was a shadow, indistinct, shifting in the edges of her vision. But as she stepped closer, it became clearer. A person. No, not a person. A reflection of herself. Her face, her form, but distorted, warped. It was her, and yet it was not. You. The reflection rasped, its voice an echo of her own, distorted and hollow. You chose the wrong path, Thessaly. The spiral was not meant to be freed. It was meant to be preserved. Thessaly stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. What are you? The figure moved closer, its form flickering like a shadow caught in the wind. I am the wound you have created, it said. I am the fracture you thought you could heal. I am the part of you that was left behind. Thessaly reached out to touch the figure, but her hand passed through it like mist. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I thought I could make it right. The reflection laughed, a sound that echoed in her ears like the rustling of dead leaves. You cannot undo what has been done. The spiral was not just a force of time, Thessaly. It was a barrier. A safeguard. And now, you have torn it apart. The past, the present, the future, they no longer exist in their proper order. What you have released cannot be contained. Thessaly's heart pounded in her chest as the figure slowly began to fade. What can I do? She asked desperately. How can I fix it? The figure smiled, but it was a smile of knowing. The spiral cannot be fixed, only redefined. But be warned, keeper, the new spiral you have created will be unstable. It will twist and tear at the fabric of reality. It will consume what it was meant to protect. And with that, the figure disappeared, leaving Thessaly alone in the clearing. The air was thick with uncertainty, the trees now standing motionless, like statues carved from stone. Thessaly stood still, trying to make sense of the words she had just heard. The spiral, free from the constraints of memory and time, was now a force of chaos. She had hoped for rebirth, for healing. But instead, she had unleashed something dangerous, something unpredictable. And the forest, the very land she had sworn to protect, was now torn apart by the consequences of her choice. A low rumble echoed through the earth, followed by the sharp cracking of wood. Thessaly turned toward the sound, her heart in her throat. The trees around her began to shift, their trunks bending and twisting. They weren't just growing, they were contorting, bending into shapes that were unnatural, monstrous. The earth trembled again as the ground cracked open, revealing a glowing chasm beneath the surface. Something ancient, something dark, was awakening. The spiral was no longer simply a force of balance. It had become a force of entropy, of unraveling. And now, it was pulling everything into its chaotic embrace. Thessaly stumbled back, her mind racing. What had she done? The path she had chosen, it had not healed the spiral. It had only broken it, exposing its true nature. She had released chaos, and now the forest, the world itself, was paying the price. She could feel the power of the spiral coursing through the air around her, but it was no longer gentle, no longer nurturing. It was wild, untamed, and it was pulling everything apart. Thessaly took a deep breath, her hand clutching the pendant tightly. There was no going back. She had made her choice, and now she would have to face the consequences. And she would do whatever it took to fix it. Act 9, The Shattered Spiral. The air was thick with the scent of decay. The trees groaned under the weight of the twisted spiral, their roots now sprawling like serpents, seeking to escape the chaos that Thessaly had unleashed. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself were being torn apart by the force of the unraveling spiral. Every movement in the forest seemed to be a ripple in time, as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its breaking point. Thessaly stood in the center of the clearing, watching the devastation unfold around her. The once vibrant forest was now a landscape of twisted, gnarled trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was heavy, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something to fix the rift she had created. The pendant around her neck still glowed faintly, its spiral pattern pulsing with a steady rhythm, but the light had changed. It was no longer the bright, radiant glow of the spiral's balance. Instead, it was dim and flickering, like a candle struggling to stay lit in a storm. Thessaly took a step forward, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. She had freed the spiral, yes. But what she had freed was not the force of balance and life that she had imagined. It was something darker, something more chaotic. What have I done? She whispered to herself, the question echoing through the hollow space of the forest. She had hoped to bring healing to the forest, to undo the damage caused by the hunger, but instead, she had unleashed the very force that had once bound the world in equilibrium. The spiral had become untethered, its threads unraveling faster than she could comprehend. And with it, the world was following suit. The trees, now twisted into unnatural shapes, began to shift, their branches moving in jerky, unpredictable motions. The ground beneath Thessaly's feet cracked open again, revealing a glowing chasm, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Something was stirring beneath the earth, something ancient and hungry. It had awoken in response to the chaos she had created. Thessaly fell to her knees, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. I have to fix this, she thought, desperation gripping her heart. I have to put the spiral back. I have to restore balance. But how? She closed her eyes, her mind racing for a solution. She could feel the forest around her, the very heart of it, pulsing with the chaotic energy of the spiral. The ancient power was still there, but it was no longer under control. It was wild, untamed, and it was tearing everything apart. She remembered the words of the child, the version of herself that had spoken to her through the forest. The spiral is not a path. It's a memory loop. You've been here before. Thessaly's eyes shot open. The memory loop. That was it. The spiral had always been about memory, about binding the past to the present and the future. But what if she could reverse the loop? What if she could undo the decision she had made and restore the balance that had once existed? But how? And at what cost? The forest around her groaned again, louder this time. The ground shook beneath her, and the chasm before her grew wider, its light intensifying. The power of the spiral was surging, and it was beginning to consume everything in its path. Thessaly rose to her feet, her eyes fixed on the chasm. She could feel the pull of the spiral, its energy beckoning her, calling her to fix what she had broken. She had no choice now. She had to confront the force she had released. With a determined breath, she stepped forward, her body moving on its own accord. As she approached the chasm, the energy around her intensified. The light from the pendant burned hot against her chest, the spiral pattern pulsing faster, quicker, as if it, too, understood the urgency of the moment. Thessaly reached the edge of the chasm, her breath shallow, her heart racing. She could feel the power of the spiral surging beneath her feet, but it was no longer the comforting hum of balance. It was a force of destruction. She could see something deep within the chasm, something moving in the shadows, something that was not entirely of this world. A figure, cloaked in darkness, its form flickering like a shadow. And then she heard a voice familiar, yet distant. Thessaly. She gasped, recognizing the voice immediately. Kale. She whispered. The figure in the chasm stepped forward, its form becoming clearer. It was him or, at least, what remained of him. His once warm features were now twisted, his body flickering like a fading star. He reached out a hand, his voice breaking through the air. "You cannot fix what is broken, Thessaly. The spiral has already unraveled. There is no going back." Thessaly took a step back, her heart pounding. "No. I can fix it. I can restore it. I can put things right." Kale's form flickered again, his voice now a hollow echo. "You cannot undo what you have done. The spiral is no longer a force of balance. It is a force of destruction, and it will consume everything in its path, including you." Thessaly's hands trembled as she reached for the pendant, her fingers clutching it tightly. She could feel its energy surging, pulsing with the rhythm of the spiral. It was not too late. She could still fix this. She could still restore balance. But the choice she had to make was not an easy one. The power of the spiral swirled around her, its energy growing stronger, faster. The chasm before her pulsed, the light from its depths growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. Thessaly took one final breath, her mind clear. "I won't let you consume everything," she whispered. With one swift motion, she pressed the pendant into the chasm. Act 10, The Price of Freedom. Thessaly's vision was consumed by light. Blinding, all-encompassing light. It was the kind of light that didn't illuminate the world but redefined it. Every shadow, every shape around her twisted and distorted as the force of the spiral surged. She could feel the raw power coursing through her, both a curse and a blessing, a force she had freed and yet could not control. The chasm swallowed the pendant with a deafening roar, the ground shaking beneath her as if the very earth was being torn apart. The light from the depths of the chasm expanded, filling the forest, reaching into every tree, every leaf, every branch. The air grew thick with energy, the power of the spiral now fully unleashed. But it was not healing. It was breaking. She had hoped to repair the balance, to fix the damage she had done. But now, she realized with a sinking heart, that there was no simple return. The spiral, in all its freedom, was a force of chaos, not creation. It did not simply restore what had been lost, it tore apart what was already fragile. And in that destruction, Thessaly felt the cost of her choice. The trees around her began to distort. Their forms flickered, shifting like shadows caught in the wind. The once stable ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing the dark, swirling depths of the forest's forgotten heart. The sky above her twisted, bending, warping with colors that should not exist. The spiral was not simply a force of memory and time. It was a living entity, a breathing thing that had been kept at bay for centuries by the keepers. Now that it had been freed, it was alive, and it was hungry. Thessaly staggered backward, her breath shallow, as the very world around her seemed to unravel. "What have I done?" she whispered, the weight of her mistake crushing her chest. "What have I unleashed?" She tried to focus, tried to regain control, but the power of the spiral was overwhelming. It was no longer the forest that surrounded her. The forest had become the spiral itself, a manifestation of chaos, of time forgotten, of memory lost. The trees were no longer trees, they were the twisted remnants of the past, reaching toward her like hands of the dead. And from the heart of the chaos, she heard the voice again. Thessaly. She turned. The figure stood before her, its form flickering in the ever-shifting light. It was Kale, or at least what had once been him. His body was now a dark, flickering shadow, bound to the chaos of the spiral. His voice was a distorted echo, a broken fragment of what it had once been. You have freed the spiral, Keeper. You have released it from its prison, but you have not set it free. Thessaly stepped back, her heart racing. What do you mean? The figure's hollow eyes met hers. The spiral was not meant to be free, Thessaly. It was never meant to be free. A wave of energy pulsed from the figure, and Thessaly's knees buckled, the world spinning around her. The light from the chasm grew brighter, and for a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. The ground beneath her feet began to crumble, and the very air seemed to crack and bend, like the fabric of reality itself was tearing apart. The spiral was a necessary prison, Kale's voice echoed. It kept the world balanced. Kept it whole. By releasing it, you've shattered everything. The past, the present, and the future, they no longer exist in their rightful place. Thessaly closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing against her like an iron hand. She had hoped to fix it, to heal the world she had broken. But now, she saw the truth. She had unleashed a force that had been contained for a reason. The spiral, freed from its chains, was consuming everything in its path. The world around her was unraveling, the forest, the sky, the very fabric of time itself. And she had no way to stop it? I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know. I thought I was saving you, saving all of us. Kale's shadowed form flickered again. You have no idea the damage you've caused, Thessaly. The spiral is not just a force of memory and time. It is a living thing. And now that it has been unleashed, it cannot be controlled. Thessaly's chest tightened, the weight of his words sinking in. She had broken the balance, and now she had to face the consequences. The air around her vibrated with the spiral's raw energy, and she could feel herself being pulled toward the chasm once more. The forest, the world, was collapsing in on itself, the chaotic force of the spiral consuming everything it touched. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to do something. She had to stop this. But how? I will make it right, Thessaly said through gritted teeth, standing tall despite the overwhelming force of the spiral surrounding her. I will find a way to restore balance. The energy in the air pulsed again, louder this time, as if the spiral itself was responding to her words. The chasm flickered and shimmered, its dark depths swirling with an intensity that threatened to swallow her whole. Thessaly stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the chasm. She could feel the power of the spiral coursing through her, but this time, she didn't recoil. She embraced it. "I will not let it destroy us," she said, her voice firm. "I will find the way." Act 11, The Trial of the Keeper. The ground beneath Thessaly's feet trembled once more, this time with a force that made her bones rattle. The chasm before her pulsed, its dark depth seeming to call to her, a promise of answers buried deep within its eternal darkness. But even as she stood on the brink, she could feel the weight of the spiral's power pressing in from all sides, trying to pull her toward the abyss. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, each pulse reminding her of the gravity of her decision. She had freed the spiral, but now she could feel the destruction it was causing. The world was unraveling, and every breath she took seemed to further fuel the chaos. Time itself was starting to collapse, the past, present, and future no longer existing in their rightful places. Thessaly took a deep breath, gathering all the strength she could muster. She had made her choice, and now, there was no turning back. The forest around her was no longer the forest she had known. It was wild, untamed, a reflection of the spiral's chaos. The trees twisted and bent unnaturally, their branches curling into impossible shapes, their roots breaking free from the earth. She looked down at the pendant around her neck. The spiral pattern was now faint, its light flickering like a dying star. She could feel its energy pulsing weakly, as if it too were struggling to survive in the maelstrom of destruction she had unleashed. "What can I do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the collapsing world. "How can I fix this?" The answer came in a whisper, a voice that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. "You cannot fix what is broken, but you can choose what it becomes." Thessaly's eyes widened as she looked around. The voice was familiar, and yet, it was not a voice she had ever heard before. It was not Kale's voice, nor the voice of the forest. It was something else. Something older. Something deeper. "Choose," the voice said again, its words echoing in her mind. "Choose whether the spiral shall be the force of destruction you have awakened, or the force of balance it once was." Thessaly clenched her fists, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had broken the spiral. She had freed it from its chains. And now, she had to face the consequences of that choice. The world around her seemed to swirl, the ground shifting beneath her feet as the energy of the spiral intensified. The trees bent and swayed violently, their branches snapping in the wind. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy, each breath she took filling her with a sense of dread. "But I don't have the power to fix it," Thessaly thought, her mind racing. "I don't have the strength to undo what I've done." But as the voice spoke again, she realized the truth. "You have the power," the voice said softly. "You have the power to choose what the spiral becomes. Not with force, but with understanding." with sacrifice. Thessaly took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words settle deep in her chest. She had been so focused on fixing her mistake, on restoring balance to the spiral, that she had forgotten the true nature of power. It was not about control. It was about acceptance. It was about understanding the forces at play and making peace with them. She closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. The pain of her past, the loss of Kale, the destruction of the spiral, it all seemed so overwhelming. But she knew now that she could not fight it. She could not undo the damage she had caused. But she could choose what came next. With that realization, Thessaly opened her eyes, her gaze steady. She stepped forward, her feet firm on the trembling ground. The chasm before her pulsed with dark energy, but she did not flinch. She did not turn away. "I choose to make it right," she whispered, her voice filled with resolve. "I choose to restore the balance, not by fighting the spiral, but by understanding it. By accepting it." As soon as the words left her mouth, the ground beneath her feet shifted again, but this time, the tremor was different. It was not violent. It was not chaotic. It was calm, steady, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The trees around her began to straighten, their branches no longer bent and twisted. The sky above her, once dark and violent, began to clear, the swirling clouds giving way to the soft light of dawn. The energy of the spiral shifted, no longer a destructive force, but a force of growth, of balance, of renewal. Thessaly felt the power of the spiral surge through her once more, but this time, it was not overwhelming. It was a gentle pulse, a steady rhythm, like the flow of a river, constant, yet ever-changing. And as she stood there, at the center of the spiral's rebirth, she realized that she had not only chosen the spiral's future, she had chosen her own. She was no longer the keeper of the spiral. She was the guardian of it, standing as a bridge between the chaos and the balance. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was her true purpose. The voice spoke one last time, its words filled with pride and understanding. "You have chosen wisely, Thessaly. The spiral will no longer be bound by the past. It will grow, evolve, and change. And so will you." The light from the chasm began to fade, the energy of the spiral now flowing freely through the forest, no longer trapped, no longer broken. The world around Thessaly was healing, the trees returning to their natural state, the sky clearing, the earth solidifying beneath her feet. And as the last remnants of the spiral's chaos faded into the distance, Thessaly knew that her journey was far from over. Act 12, The Guardianship of the Spiral. The forest was still. The chaos had abated, the maelstrom of energy subsiding into a calm, rhythmic pulse. Thessaly stood at the heart of it all, the pendant now glowing softly against her chest. The spiral, once broken and twisted, had been reborn not as it once was, but as something new. Something alive. Something free. The sky above was clear, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the canopy, casting soft beams across the forest floor. The trees stood tall and proud once more, their branches reaching skyward as if welcoming the light. The air was thick with the scent of new growth, the promise of a world restored. The forest was no longer the twisted, decaying place it had been. It was vibrant, pulsing with life, and at its heart, the spiral was whole again, no longer a force of destruction, but a force of creation. Thessaly had done it. She had healed the spiral, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The voice, deep and ancient, had whispered to her in the chaos. She had chosen. And now, she would need to protect what she had created. The spiral was free, but its power was still raw, still untamed. There would be those who sought to control it, to twist it back into the prison it once was. She had to be ready. The forest around her seemed to hum with the energy of the spiral. The trees, the earth, the very air, it was all connected, all part of the same living, breathing entity. And she, as the guardian of the spiral, was now bound to it. But Thessaly did not fear the bond. She had chosen this path, and she would walk it with courage. As she took a step forward, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The trees parted, revealing a narrow path she had not seen before. It was not a path she had made, nor one that the spiral had carved. It was a path that had always been there, hidden from view until now. She followed it, her heart steady, her mind focused. She did not know where the path would lead, but she knew she had to walk it. The spiral had been freed, but its power was not to be taken lightly. It needed to be nurtured, protected. And she was the only one who could do it. The path wound through the forest, leading her deeper into the heart of the land. The air grew cooler, the trees taller, their bark smooth and gleaming like polished marble. The further she walked, the more she could feel the weight of the spiral pressing on her, guiding her, pulling her forward. As she reached the end of the path, she came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, ancient and worn by time. Its surface was etched with intricate symbols, spirals woven into the very fabric of the stone. And at the base of the altar, a single, glowing crystal pulsed with a steady rhythm, the heart of the spiral. Thessaly approached the altar slowly, her eyes fixed on the crystal. She could feel the energy radiating from it, the raw power of the spiral that she had freed. It was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. She could sense the force within it, the potential for both creation and destruction. Her fingers brushed against the crystal's surface, and a shock of energy surged through her. The power of the spiral flooded her senses, filling her with an overwhelming sense of clarity. She could see it now, the future, the past, the present, all tangled together in a single, unbroken thread. The spiral was not just a force of nature, she realized. It was a reflection of life itself. A living, breathing entity, shaped by every choice, every action, every thought. And now, it was her responsibility to protect it. Thessaly stepped back from the altar, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just experienced. The forest, the spiral, the balance of time. It was all connected, and it was fragile. She had healed it, yes, but it was not invincible. There would be those who sought to control it, to use it for their own gain. And if they succeeded, the chaos she had freed would return. She had to keep the balance. Her hand instinctively moved to the pendant around her neck, feeling the pulse of the spiral within her. It was a connection she could not ignore. She was its guardian, its keeper. And as long as the spiral existed, so would she. The forest seemed to respond to her thoughts, the trees swaying gently as if nodding in agreement. The air around her shifted, and she could feel the presence of the spiral everywhere. It was in the wind, in the earth, in the trees. It was the lifeblood of the world. And she, Thessaly, was its protector. As she turned to leave the clearing, she heard a rustle behind her. She spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the pendant. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a tall man, cloaked in dark robes, his face obscured by a hood. Thessaly froze, her heart pounding. She had felt him before. His presence was familiar, though she could not place it. "You've done it," the figure said, his voice low and haunting. "You've freed the spiral. But you've also opened a door that should have remained closed." Thessaly narrowed her eyes. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, his hood falling back to reveal a face she knew all too well, a face from her past. Kale. But it was not the Kale she had known. His eyes were cold, empty, his expression twisted with something darker. "I was the last of the keepers," Kale said, his voice echoing with a hollow emptiness. "But now I am something more. And you've made a grave mistake." Thessaly stepped back, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Kale's eyes darkened. "The spiral was never meant to be free. You've unleashed something far greater than you realize. And now, the world will pay the price for your choices." Thessaly's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She had freed the spiral. She had brought balance. But now, she realized, the true cost of her decision was yet to be seen. "I will protect it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "I will make sure the spiral remains whole." Kale smiled, but it was not a smile of reassurance. "The spiral cannot be protected. It will unravel. And when it does, you will be the one who has to face the consequences." The forest grew still once more, the air heavy with the weight of his words. Thessaly stood firm, but in the pit of her stomach, she could feel the dread growing. She had freed the spiral. But now, it was up to her to protect it and the world from the darkness it had unleashed. Act 13, The Battle for the Spiral's Soul. The air crackled with tension. Thessaly stood firm before Kale, her eyes narrowing as the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the trees silent witnesses to this confrontation, their branches twisted and reaching like broken fingers. The ground beneath them quivered, as though the very earth could feel the pulse of the spiral, wild, untamed, and chaotic. Kale's darkened eyes locked onto hers, empty of warmth, consumed by something darker than Thessaly had ever known. He had been her companion, her love. But now, he was something else entirely. He was no longer the man she had fought to save. He was something that had been changed, twisted by the very power of the spiral he had once protected. You freed the spiral, Kale's voice rang out, hollow and distorted, a strange echo that reverberated through the forest. You've opened a door that should have remained shut, Thessaly. You've unleashed something far greater than you realize. Thessaly's pulse quickened, her heart racing with fear and resolve. The spiral had been freed, yes. But she had made a choice. She had chosen to break the cycle of chaos, to let it evolve, to let it breathe. And now, she was standing at the edge of her own creation, facing the consequences. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. I've freed it. I've fixed it. I've made it whole again. Kale took a step closer, his shadow stretching across the ground. You freed it, yes. But in doing so, you gave it the power to grow. You gave it the power to feed on the very world it was meant to protect. You cannot control it, Thessaly. The spiral is no longer bound. It is a force of destruction now, not creation. And you, he paused, his eyes darkening. You are its vessel. Thessaly shook her head, struggling to comprehend his words. No, I didn't. But Kale interrupted her, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, you did. The spiral needs a vessel, Thessaly. A keeper who can guide it. And now it has chosen you. Not as its protector, but as its ultimate weapon. You freed it because you thought you could control it. But you cannot. No one can. Thessaly's mind raced as she processed his words. She had wanted to restore the balance, to heal the spiral. She had wanted to make it whole, to give it freedom. But now she realized the truth, she had unleashed something unstoppable. The spiral was no longer just a force of time and memory. It was an entity unto itself, a force that could devour everything in its path. But Thessaly wasn't ready to give up. She wouldn't let Kale's words control her. She had made her choice. She had chosen to free the spiral, to let it grow, to let it evolve. And now, she would protect it not as a keeper, but as something greater. As a guardian. I won't let it destroy us, she said, her voice steady, the weight of her decision settling deep within her. I've freed the spiral, yes. But I'll protect it. I'll make sure it doesn't consume everything it touches. Kale's lips twisted into a cruel smile. You can't protect it, Thessaly. It's too late. The spiral is already beyond your control. It's already too far gone. The trees around them began to groan, their branches bending unnaturally, as if reacting to Kale's words. The ground trembled beneath Thessaly's feet, and she could feel the power of the spiral surging through her, wild and uncontrollable. It was calling to her, beckoning her to embrace its destructive force. But Thessaly resisted. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She would not let Kale's twisted vision of the spiral become reality. She would fight for it, for everything it represented. For the balance she had once sought to restore. "Then I'll stop you," Thessaly said, her voice rising with determination. With that, she reached into the heart of the spiral within her, feeling its raw, untamed power surge through her veins. The pendant around her neck flared to life, its spiral glowing brighter than ever before. The energy of the spiral pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a rhythm that resonated deep within her. Kale stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you can control it, Thessaly? You think you can wield its power? You're nothing but a pawn in its game. And now, you're mine." Thessaly's eyes blazed with defiance. She raised her hand, and in that instant, the world around her shifted. The spiral responded to her will, its energy flowing freely, yet it did not overwhelm her. It was hers to control now. She had made her choice, and she would not falter. "I am not yours," Thessaly said firmly. "I am the guardian of the spiral. And I will protect it no matter the cost." The forest around them erupted into chaos. The trees twisted and cracked, their branches snapping like brittle bones. The earth itself trembled as the spiral's power surged in every direction, shaking the very foundations of reality. Kale raised his hand, and the dark energy surrounding him began to crackle with destructive force. "You cannot win, Thessaly. You're fighting something far older than you. The spiral is not a force of balance. It is a force of chaos. And now, it's consuming everything including you." But Thessaly stood her ground, her body vibrating with the power of the spiral. She could feel its energy pulsing through her, and this time, she embraced it. The chaos that Kale sought to control was no longer a weapon against her. It was her strength. It was the force that would allow her to protect everything she had fought for. "I won't let you twist it," she said, her voice steady. "I will be the one to guide it. To make it whole again." With a wave of her hand, the spiral responded. The energy surged outward, pushing Kale's dark power back. The trees groaned in response, their twisted forms straightening as the power of the spiral began to cleanse them. The chaos receded, replaced by a quiet, steady pulse. But Kale was not finished. With a roar, he lunged toward her, his form flickering and shifting like a shadow. His hand reached out to grab her, but Thessaly was ready. She focused all her energy into the pendant, and the spiral responded, its power swirling around her like a protective barrier. In that moment, the world seemed to freeze. Time slowed. The air hummed with energy. Thessaly reached out, touching the heart of the spiral within her, drawing on its energy one final time. She pushed the force outward, not in anger, but in balance. The spiral was no longer a weapon. It was a force of creation, of rebirth. And as Kale lunged toward her, the energy of the spiral engulfed him, pulling him into the very heart of its chaos. "This is not the end," Thessaly whispered, watching as Kale's form dissolved into the swirling maelstrom of the spiral. "This is the beginning." Act 14, The Fractured Path. Thessaly stood in the aftermath of the battle, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. The energy of the spiral surged through her, filling her veins with a power that was both overwhelming and intoxicating. The world around her was still, but she could feel the weight of the choice she had made, a choice that had freed the spiral, but also unleashed chaos in its wake. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and for a moment, she feared that the spiral's power would consume everything around her. The trees, once so vibrant and alive, now stood twisted and broken, their branches reaching out like dark, skeletal hands. The sky above had shifted, its once azure hue now replaced by swirling clouds of red and black, as though the world itself were bleeding. She looked at the pendant around her neck. Its spiral symbol flickered weakly, its light dimming with every passing moment. The energy of the spiral was fading, and with it, the hope she had once held that she could restore balance to the world. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth: the spiral could no longer be controlled. It had been set free, and now it was spreading, consuming everything in its path. The world was unraveling, and Thessaly was at the center of it all. But she refused to give up. She had made her choice. She had chosen to free the spiral, to let it evolve, and she would not abandon it now. "I will not let it destroy everything," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. "I will protect it. I will protect this world." As if in response, the ground shook beneath her again, this time more violently. The trees groaned, their roots twisting and breaking free from the earth. The air around her crackled with energy, and Thessaly could feel the spiral's power surging once more. But this time, it wasn't chaos. It was calling to her, beckoning her forward. Without hesitation, she took a step forward, her feet moving with purpose. She had to find the heart of the spiral, the source of its power. She had to understand it not just as a force of destruction, but as a force of life, of creation. The path ahead of her was unclear, the forest now a dark, twisted version of itself, the trees leaning in toward her as if watching her every move. The energy of the spiral pulsed through the ground, guiding her, pulling her toward the center of the forest. As she walked, Thessaly could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had unleashed the spiral, yes, but she had also freed it. And now, she had to face the consequences of that freedom. There was no going back. But she would not be afraid. She would find a way to restore balance. The path ahead of her led to a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching out like tendrils. The tree was unlike any Thessaly had seen before. Its bark shimmered with a faint light, and at its base, the ground seemed to pulse with energy. This was the heart of the spiral. Thessaly approached the tree slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the power of the spiral radiating from it, a force that was both beautiful and terrifying. The air around her hummed with energy, and as she reached out to touch the tree, a jolt of power surged through her. She gasped, her body trembling with the force of it. The energy of the spiral coursed through her, and for a moment, she saw everything. The past, the present, the future all intertwined, all connected through the spiral. She saw the choices she had made, the paths she had walked, and the consequences of her actions. And she saw the darkness that still lingered, the remnants of the hunger, the force that had once twisted the spiral into a weapon of destruction. It was still there, hidden deep within the roots of the tree, waiting for its moment to strike. "No," Thessaly whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't let it win. I won't let it consume everything." With that, she placed her hand on the tree, and the energy of the spiral surged through her once more. This time, it was different. It wasn't chaotic. It was focused. She could feel the pulse of the spiral, the rhythm of time itself, and with each heartbeat, she felt herself growing stronger. She closed her eyes and focused, reaching deep within herself. She had to control the spiral. She had to reshape it, not as a force of destruction, but as a force of creation. A force that could heal, that could restore balance. The ground beneath her feet shook again, but this time, it was a steady, controlled pulse. The trees around her began to straighten, their branches no longer twisted and broken. The sky above cleared, the red and black clouds dissipating into the ether. But the energy of the spiral was still there, pulsing beneath her feet. It was alive, and it was waiting for her to make the final choice. Thessaly took a deep breath, her body trembling as she reached deep within herself. She could feel the power of the spiral, its energy flowing through her, guiding her. She had freed it. But now, she had to guide it. She whispered the words, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered in her chest. "I choose to protect you." The tree before her pulsed with light, the energy of the spiral flowing freely through it. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, but this time, it wasn't chaos. It was harmony. The spiral was shifting, changing. And Thessaly knew, deep in her heart, that she had made the right choice. The trees around her began to heal, their twisted forms straightening, their leaves regrowing. The forest, once broken and corrupted, was coming back to life. The energy of the spiral was no longer a force of destruction. It was a force of balance, of creation. Thessaly stood still, her breath steadying as the world around her shifted, settled. The spiral was no longer a threat. It was a part of her, and she was a part of it. And as the last remnants of chaos faded into the distance, she knew that the battle was not over. There would be more challenges, more decisions to make. But Thessaly was ready. She had chosen the path of the spiral, and she would protect it and the world no matter what came next. Act 15, The Shadow of the Keeper. The forest had healed, but the air still buzzed with tension. Thessaly stood in the center of the clearing, her eyes closed as she reached for the energy of the spiral. She could feel it, the raw power coursing through the trees, the roots, the earth. It was alive now, more than ever, as if it had finally found its true rhythm, its natural state. But she knew better than to think that the world was completely healed. It was only just beginning. She had chosen to protect the spiral, to guide it toward balance instead of destruction. But what did that mean? How could she, one person, bear the weight of such an immense responsibility? Could she really control the spiral, not as a keeper, but as a guardian? The forest is still fragile, she reminded herself, taking a deep breath. And so am I. The pendant around her neck pulsed faintly, its spiral symbol glowing gently. She had always felt a connection to it, but now that connection was different. It was more intimate, more alive. The spiral wasn't just something she held in her hands, it was a part of her, and she was a part of it. Suddenly, she heard a rustle in the bushes nearby. Her instincts kicked in, and she spun around, her body tensing. She was ready for whatever came next. The forest had already changed her. She was no longer the woman who had unknowingly unleashed chaos into the world. She was stronger, more attuned to the forces around her. A figure emerged from the shadows. Thessaly's heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Kale. But it wasn't the Kale she had seen before, consumed by the chaos of the spiral. This Kale was whole again, his body appearing as it had when she first met him. His eyes were still dark, but they were no longer the empty pits of the man who had become part of the spiral's destructive force. They were searching. The familiar warmth she had once seen in them returned, though it was tempered by something darker now. "Thessaly," he said softly, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I never thought I'd see you again." Thessaly stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. Kale's gaze softened, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I've come to warn you," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "You've chosen to protect the spiral. But there are those who will not let you do it. You've changed the world, Thessaly, and there are forces out there that will seek to control what you've unleashed." Thessaly's eyes narrowed. "I won't let anyone control it. I'm its guardian, not its prisoner." Kale stepped closer, his eyes glistening with something she couldn't quite place. "That's the problem, Thessaly. You can't protect the spiral alone. You may think you've freed it, but in doing so, you've awakened something that is beyond both of us. Something far older, far more powerful. Thessaly's chest tightened. What are you talking about? The hunger, Kale said, his voice low. The hunger is not gone. It is still here, in the roots of the spiral. It is the very force that made the spiral what it was before. And now that you've broken its chains, it will try to consume you and everything else. Thessaly took a step back, her mind racing. The hunger had been a twisted reflection of the spiral. It was the dark force that had corrupted the spiral before she had freed it. But if what Kale said was true, it wasn't gone. It was still lurking, hidden deep within the spiral's essence. How do you know this? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Kale looked down, as if searching for the right words. Because it's inside me too. I was its vessel, Thessaly. I became the hunger before I became part of the spiral. And when I tried to fight it, to contain it, I failed. But you're different. You're the one who has the power to stop it. You can heal the spiral, but you can't do it alone. You need help. Thessaly's heart ached. She had been so focused on freeing the spiral, on creating something new, that she hadn't considered the darker side of it. The hunger was a force that had existed long before she had ever come to the forest, and it would not easily be quelled. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. How do I stop it? How do I fix what I've unleashed? Kale met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. I don't know. He sighed heavily, the weight of the truth sinking in. But I do know one thing: you can't do it alone. You need allies. You need to find those who will help you restore the balance. The spiral is too powerful for one person to control. The forest around them shifted once again. The ground trembled, and Thessaly could feel the pull of the spiral growing stronger. It was as if the forest was responding to the conversation, to the decisions being made. The path ahead of her was uncertain, but the energy of the spiral was clear. It was a force that had always been part of the world, and now that it had been unleashed, it could not be ignored. Thessaly's gaze hardened. Then I'll find them. I'll find the allies I need to protect the spiral and restore the balance. No matter what it takes. Kale stepped back, his face softening. I hope you can, Thessaly. But remember, the hunger is not just in the spiral. It's inside us all. It feeds on our fear, our desires. It will be waiting for you, and when it comes, you will have to decide whether to fight it or join it. Thessaly stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had chosen to protect the spiral, but she now realized the true cost of her decision. She had freed it, yes, but she had also awakened something far darker, something that would stop at nothing to consume the world. She had to stop it. But how? With a final glance at Kale, Thessaly turned and walked into the depths of the forest, her mind racing with the weight of her choices. The battle was far from over. She had freed the spiral, but now it was time to face the hunger and whatever else the spiral might bring. Act 16, The Hunt for Allies. The air was thick with uncertainty as Thessaly walked deeper into the forest. The chaos of the spiral was still fresh in her mind, the fear, the destruction, the overwhelming sense of power that had surged through her. She had released the spiral, freed it from its chains, but now she realized the truth: the hunger was not gone. It was still inside the spiral, and it was waiting for the right moment to consume everything she had fought to protect. Thessaly clenched her fists, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. She had chosen to free the spiral, but she had also awakened a force that was beyond her control. Now, the world was on the brink of unraveling, and she had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. She had to find allies. The path ahead was unclear, but Thessaly knew one thing: she couldn't face this alone. The hunger was too powerful, too dangerous. She needed to find others who could help her restore balance to the spiral, others who could fight the darkness that was rising. But where could she find them? Who could she trust in a world that was now so fractured? Her thoughts turned to Kale. He had warned her, but his words were filled with doubt. He had once been part of the spiral's chaos, and now he was lost in the shadows. Could he be the ally she needed? Or would he be yet another obstacle she had to overcome? No, she thought, shaking her head. I can't trust him. Not yet. Not until I understand more about what the spiral has become. Thessaly continued through the forest, her steps slow and deliberate. She needed to think. She needed time to process everything that had happened, to understand what the spiral truly was and how it could be controlled. But with every step, she could feel the pull of the spiral growing stronger. The energy was still wild, still untamed. It was calling to her, urging her to embrace its power. The forest around her was quiet now, the wind still and the leaves silent. The trees, once twisted and broken, had begun to straighten. The forest was healing, but there was still a lingering sense of dread, as if something was watching her from the shadows. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. The forest was alive, but not in the way she had once known it. It was more aware now, more attuned to her presence. She could feel the trees stretching toward her, their branches reaching out as if to touch her, to claim her. I am not its prisoner, Thessaly reminded herself. I am its guardian. With that thought, she pressed on, the path leading her deeper into the heart of the forest. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing: she had to find a way to stop the hunger before it consumed everything. Her journey took her to the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to a vast, open plain. The land stretched out before her, the horizon a blur of colors in the distance. It was here, on the edge of the world, that she would find the answers she sought. The plain was silent, the wind whipping through the grass like a warning. As she stepped onto the open ground, Thessaly felt the energy of the spiral grow even stronger. The air itself seemed to hum with power, the very earth beneath her feet vibrating with the force of it. She could feel the pulse of the spiral, its energy wrapping around her like a cloak. And then, she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the plain, watching her. Thessaly's heart skipped a beat. She had been so focused on the forest, on the spiral, that she hadn't sensed the figure's presence. She should have known. There was no escaping the forces that were watching her, no matter where she went. The figure stepped forward, revealing a tall woman cloaked in deep blue. Her eyes were sharp, her expression unreadable, but there was a sense of familiarity about her. As she drew closer, Thessaly realized with a shock that she knew this woman. "You," Thessaly breathed, her mind racing to place her. "You're one of the keepers." The woman nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I am," she said. "And you are the one who has freed the spiral." Thessaly tensed, her instincts kicking in. "I freed it because I had to. It was never meant to be bound. It was meant to be free." The woman's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them. "You do not understand the full consequences of what you have done, Thessaly. The spiral was not meant to be free. It was a force of balance, of stability. Now that it is free, it will tear the world apart if it is not controlled." Thessaly's chest tightened. "I know the dangers. I know the hunger is still inside it." The woman's gaze hardened. "And you think you can control it? You think you can protect the world from the chaos you've unleashed?" "I can," Thessaly said, her voice firm. "I've made my choice. I freed the spiral to protect it, to guide it. And I will not let it destroy everything." The woman stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "Then you must be prepared, Thessaly. You must be prepared for what comes next." Thessaly frowned. "What do you mean?" The woman stepped closer, her voice low and intense. "The spiral is not just a force of time and memory. It is a force of creation and destruction. The hunger is not just an entity of the past. It is a part of the spiral itself. And now, you must decide whether to fight it or become part of it." Thessaly swallowed, her mind racing. The woman's words were a warning, but they were also a challenge. "I'll fight it," Thessaly said, her voice steady, despite the fear creeping in. "I'll fight for the spiral, for balance. I won't let it consume everything." The woman nodded, but there was a glint of something in her eyes, something like resignation. "Then you must find the others. You cannot fight this alone. The hunger is a force that can destroy you. And you will need allies, powerful allies, to help you fight it." Thessaly felt a chill run down her spine. "Where can I find them?" The woman's gaze turned distant. "There are others like you, Thessaly. Others who have felt the pull of the spiral. Seek them out. They will be your allies in this battle. But be warned, some of them may not be what they seem. Some may seek to control the spiral, just as you have. With that, the woman turned, her cloak billowing around her as she vanished into the horizon, leaving Thessaly alone on the open plain. Thessaly stood still for a long time, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The journey ahead of her would not be easy. The hunger was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. But she had a choice to make. She could run. She could hide. Or she could fight. And she would fight. Act 17, The Gathering of Shadows. Thessaly stood at the edge of the open plain, the distant horizon stretching before her. The wind had shifted, its chill cutting through the still air as it carried with it the faintest scent of earth and decay. She had made a choice to protect the spiral, to guide its power instead of letting it destroy everything in its path. But she had not expected how difficult this path would be, nor how deeply it would test her resolve. The woman who had appeared to her, a mysterious figure from the past, had left her with more questions than answers. The warning was clear: the hunger was not just an external force, it was a part of the spiral itself. And to stop it, Thessaly would need allies. Powerful ones. Allies who understood the true nature of the spiral and the darkness it harbored. But where could she find them? Thessaly's mind raced. The woman had spoken of others like her, those who had felt the pull of the spiral. But where were they? Who were they? And more importantly, could she trust them? She couldn't afford to waste time. The spiral was alive, and its energy was growing stronger, more chaotic. She could feel it, pulsing beneath her skin, thrumming through the very air she breathed. It was both a gift and a curse, and she needed to understand it more deeply before it consumed her. Thessaly turned her gaze toward the forest behind her, the trees now standing tall and proud, their branches reaching for the sky as though beckoning her forward. It was a sign the forest was healing, but it still felt fragile. Still, it wasn't enough. The forces at play were too powerful. She needed help. And it was time to seek out the allies who could help her hold the line against the chaos that was threatening to tear the world apart. With a final, determined breath, Thessaly turned and began walking into the forest. The path was unclear, but the forest itself seemed to guide her, the trees parting just enough to let her through. She could feel the forest responding to her presence, as though it was alive, aware of her every step. After what felt like hours, the forest opened up to a clearing. In the center stood a large stone circle, ancient and worn, covered in vines and moss. The stones seemed to hum with energy, their presence heavy and powerful. This was no ordinary clearing, it was a place of power, a place where the forces of the world converged. Thessaly stepped into the circle, her heart pounding. She felt a strange pull, as if something deep within the earth was calling to her. She closed her eyes, letting the energy of the place wash over her. The spiral's pull seemed to grow stronger, its energy sinking with her heartbeat. She could feel it. This was the place where she could connect with the forces of the spiral, where she could truly understand its nature. But as she reached out, seeking to tap into that power, a voice interrupted her thoughts. You should not be here. Thessaly spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the pendant at her chest. Standing at the edge of the stone circle was a figure, tall and imposing, dressed in flowing robes of deep purple. His face was obscured by a hood, but Thessaly could feel the weight of his presence. Who are you? Thessaly demanded, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline surging through her. The figure stepped forward, the soft rustle of his robes filling the silence. I am Varnus, the last of the Order of the Old Keepers. Thessaly froze, her mind racing. The Old Keepers. She had heard of them, of course. They were the ancient protectors of the spiral, the ones who had bound it to the world's flow of time and memory. But Varnus. He was the last. What do you want from me? Thessaly asked, her voice sharp. Varnus tilted his head, his gaze piercing, even though his face remained hidden. I do not want anything from you, Thessaly. I came because I know what you have done. You freed the spiral, yes. But you've also awakened a darkness that was meant to stay buried. Thessaly felt a chill run down her spine. I know about the hunger. And I know it's still inside the spiral. But I can't just let it destroy everything. I have to fight it. I have to protect the world. Varnus's voice was low, almost regretful. You cannot fight it alone. You think you can protect the spiral, but you do not understand it. The hunger is not just an external force. It is inside you, inside all of us. It is the darkness that feeds on fear, on desire, on greed. It is part of what makes the spiral what it is. Thessaly clenched her fists. I know that. I know the cost of freeing it. But I cannot back down now. The spiral is a force of life. It's a force that can heal. I just need to figure out how to control it, how to keep it from consuming everything. Varnus stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. You are not the only one who seeks to control the spiral, Thessaly. There are others who would use its power for their own gain. You cannot protect it alone. The forces you have unleashed are too great. You need allies. And you need to act quickly. Time is running out. Thessaly's heart raced. She had known this was coming, knew that the spiral's power would attract others who sought to control it. She had to find them first. She had to find the allies who would fight with her, not against her. Where can I find these allies? She asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety building within her. Varnus hesitated for a moment before answering. There are others like you. Others who have felt the pull of the spiral. Seek them out. They will help you, if you prove yourself worthy of their trust. But beware, Thessaly, some of them will try to control you, just as you tried to control the spiral. You must decide who to trust, and who to fight. With that, Varnus turned, his form blending into the shadows of the forest. Remember, Thessaly. The spiral is not a force to be tamed. It is a force that must be guided. And only the strongest will survive its chaos. Thessaly stood still, her mind racing. She had to find these allies, but how? Where? Who would stand with her against the dark forces that sought to control the spiral? The answers weren't clear, but Thessaly knew one thing for certain: she couldn't do this alone. The battle for the spiral had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Act 18, The Gathering Storm. The wind howled through the trees as Thessaly ventured deeper into the forest, her mind racing with the words of Varnus. The burden of the spiral's power weighed heavily on her shoulders, its energy both a gift and a curse. She had freed it, yes. She had chosen to protect it, to guide it toward balance. But now, with the hunger still lurking within, she could feel the presence of something greater, something darker, that would stop at nothing to take control. Her path was unclear, and the danger felt all-encompassing. But one thing was certain: she could not face this alone. She had to find the others, those who had felt the pull of the spiral, those who could help her in this battle. The fight for the spiral was no longer just about protecting it. It was about keeping it from being consumed by darkness, by those who would use its power for their own gain. The trees seemed to close in around her as she walked, their branches bending low, their leaves whispering as if the forest itself were watching her every move. The ground beneath her feet hummed with the energy of the spiral, the raw power coursing through the earth, feeding the world around her. It was beautiful, in a way, but it was also dangerous. The spiral was no longer just a force of time and memory. It was alive, and it was not easily controlled. Thessaly's heart raced as she thought about Varnus's warning. There were others who had felt the pull of the spiral, others who would either help her or try to control her. Who could she trust? And more importantly, how would she find them? Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound, a rustling, as though something large was moving through the underbrush. Thessaly's senses heightened, and her hand instinctively went to the pendant around her neck. The spiral pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a steady rhythm that seemed to call to her. The rustling grew louder, and then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped into view. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a hood. He moved with a fluid grace, his footsteps light but purposeful. As he drew closer, Thessaly's pulse quickened. She could feel the power emanating from him, a force that seemed to resonate with the very energy of the spiral. "You are Thessaly, are you not?" the man said, his voice deep and steady. Thessaly hesitated but nodded. "I am." The man studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp and discerning. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his tone neutral but carrying an underlying sense of urgency. I am Reiner, a former keeper of the spiral. Thessaly's heart skipped a beat. Another keeper. Could he be an ally? Or was he another threat? What do you want? She asked, her voice steady but cautious. Reiner's eyes narrowed. I want to help you, Thessaly. I want to help protect the spiral. He paused, his gaze intense. But I must know that you are worthy of that help. The spiral is not something to be taken lightly. It is a force of creation and destruction, and it has its own will. You cannot control it as you think you can. It can only be guided by someone who understands its true nature. Thessaly felt a surge of frustration. I understand the spiral. I know what it is. I freed it because I believed it could bring balance to the world. I didn't think it would be this difficult. Reiner took a step closer, his presence imposing but not threatening. You cannot fight it alone, Thessaly. The forces you've unleashed are too great. You need allies. Powerful allies. The hunger is still inside the spiral, and it will take everything you have to stop it. But I can help you. If you allow me. Thessaly studied him carefully, weighing his words. Could she trust him? She had heard the warnings about others who would seek to control the spiral. But something about Reiner's presence felt genuine. There was no arrogance in his voice, no desire to control. Just a calm, unwavering determination to help. What will it cost? She asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Reiner smiled slightly, as though he had anticipated the question. It will cost you your trust, Thessaly. Trust in me. Trust in the spiral. And trust that together, we can control it or at least, prevent it from destroying everything. Thessaly's heart beat faster, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had been so focused on her own strength, on freeing the spiral, that she had overlooked the importance of collaboration. If she was to protect the spiral, to stop the hunger, she would need help. And maybe Reiner was the ally she had been searching for. I'll work with you, she said, her voice steady. But I need to know more. Tell me what you know about the hunger. Tell me how to stop it. Reiner nodded. The hunger is not an external entity. It is part of the spiral itself, born of its raw, untamed power. It feeds on fear, on greed, on the desire to control. It is the darkness that lurks at the heart of creation. And as long as it is tied to the spiral, it will always be a threat. Thessaly's mind raced. How can I stop it? The only way to stop it is to face it. To acknowledge it, to accept it as part of the spiral's nature. You cannot fight it directly. You cannot banish it. But you can guide it. You can keep it in check, prevent it from consuming everything around you. Thessaly shook her head, disbelief creeping into her voice. You want me to embrace the hunger? To accept it? Reiner's expression softened. Not embrace it, no. But accept that it is part of the spiral. It cannot be destroyed, Thessaly. It must be balanced. And only by understanding it can you hope to control it. Thessaly stared at him, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. The spiral was not a force she could control with strength or willpower alone. It was a force of nature, and its darker side, the hunger, was just as much a part of it as its potential for life. She had freed it, yes, but she had also awakened something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Then I'll do it, she said, her voice firm, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I'll find a balance. And I'll stop the hunger. Reiner nodded, his gaze approving. Then we will fight together. And together, we will protect the spiral. Act 19, The Heart of the Spiral. The forest had begun to settle, but Thessaly could still feel the tension hanging in the air. The energy of the spiral pulsed through her veins, but it was no longer just a force she could feel, it was a force she had to control. As she stood alongside Reiner, the weight of their mission hung heavily on her shoulders. The hunger, still buried deep within the spiral, was a threat unlike anything they had faced before. Reiner's presence was comforting, but it also served as a reminder of the magnitude of the task ahead. He had once been a keeper, someone who understood the intricacies of the spiral in ways Thessaly had yet to comprehend. But even Reiner seemed uncertain. The spiral had been released, its raw power unleashed into the world, and now it was up to them to manage it. To protect it. To prevent it from consuming everything they held dear. Thessaly's fingers brushed against the pendant around her neck, the symbol of the spiral glowing faintly. It was a reminder that she was its guardian now, its protector. She had freed it from the prison it had been bound to, but she had also unlocked the door to its darker side, the hunger. It was a part of the spiral. A shadow that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. We need to find it, Reiner said, his voice low and filled with purpose. The hunger. It's not something that can just be left to fester inside the spiral. We need to face it head on, or it will destroy everything. Thessaly nodded, her gaze steady. I know. But where do we start? How do we find something so elusive? Reiner's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Thessaly saw a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, or regret. We start by going to the heart of the spiral. The source of its power. The place where it all began. Thessaly's heart skipped a beat. The heart of the spiral. Where is that? Reiner's gaze was distant as he looked toward the horizon. It's deep within the forest. Far beyond where we are now. It's hidden from sight, buried beneath layers of time, memory, and energy. But it's there, Thessaly. And that's where the true power of the spiral lies. Thessaly took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Reiner's words settle on her. This was the next step. She had freed the spiral, but to control it, to stop the hunger, she needed to understand it. To find its heart, its true source, and confront whatever darkness had taken root within it. Then let's go, Thessaly said, her voice unwavering. With that, the two of them began their journey deeper into the forest, the path winding and twisted, as though the forest itself was guiding them or testing them. The trees around them seemed to shift and change with every step they took, their branches bending toward them as if trying to prevent their progress. The forest was alive, and Thessaly could feel its pulse, its energy, guiding them forward. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into the heart of the forest. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness, and Thessaly felt the weight of the spiral's power growing stronger. It was calling to her, pulling her toward its center. The farther they went, the more she could feel it, the spiral, alive with energy, with memory, with time. But there was also something darker. A presence lurking in the shadows of the forest, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We're close," Reiner said, his voice tense. Thessaly nodded, her pulse quickening as she felt the shift in the air around them. The energy of the spiral was thick now, swirling around them like a storm. It was almost as if the forest itself was alive with the energy of the spiral, pushing them forward, urging them to confront whatever awaited them at its heart. They arrived at a clearing, a vast and open space surrounded by ancient trees whose trunks were thick and gnarled. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone arch, its surface covered in strange markings, spirals that seemed to twist and shift with every passing moment. The arch pulsed with the energy of the spiral, its power radiating out into the forest like a beacon. "This is it," Reiner said quietly. "The heart of the spiral. The source of its power." Thessaly stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the energy swirling around her, could feel the presence of the spiral alive, ancient, and powerful. But she also felt something else. A dark presence. The hunger. It was here, buried deep within the spiral's heart. The stone arch before her seemed to hum with energy, the spirals etched into its surface glowing faintly. Thessaly reached out, her fingers brushing against the stone, and the world seemed to shift. For a moment, she felt like she was falling, like she was being pulled into the very heart of the spiral. And then, she saw it. A vision. A glimpse of the past. She saw the spiral as it had once been, a force of creation and balance. She saw the keepers, standing together, guarding the spiral's power, ensuring that it remained contained. But then, she saw the darkness, the hunger, rising from the depths, consuming everything in its path. The spiral, once a force of balance, had become a weapon of destruction. Thessaly gasped, her breath caught in her throat as the vision faded. She stumbled back, her heart racing. The hunger was not just a force within the spiral. It was a corruption, an ancient power that had always been there, lurking in the shadows. Reiner stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency. It's here, Thessaly. The hunger is inside the spiral, and it's waiting to be unleashed. We need to stop it now, before it consumes everything. Thessaly nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for the pendant around her neck. The spiral's energy surged through her, and she could feel its power, its strength. But she also felt the hunger, pulsing just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could feel the spiral, could feel its potential, its beauty. It was not just a force of destruction. It was a force of life, of memory, of time. It was everything that had ever been, everything that ever would be. And she would protect it? With a final, steadying breath, Thessaly stepped forward, her heart filled with resolve. She would face the hunger, and she would keep the spiral safe. No matter what it took. Act 20, The Depths of the Hunger. Thessaly stood before the massive stone arch, the very heart of the spiral, its energy pulsing around her. The vision she had just experienced was still fresh in her mind, the rise of the hunger, the force that had once corrupted the spiral, twisting it from a protector into a weapon of chaos. And now, standing in the clearing, she could feel it. The hunger was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had come so far, freed the spiral from its chains, but she knew now that the path to balance wasn't just about freeing the spiral. It was about controlling it, keeping the forces inside it in check. The hunger, this ancient force of destruction, had to be stopped. And Thessaly knew that the key to controlling the spiral was not to fight the hunger directly. It was to understand it, to accept it as part of the spiral, and to ensure that it would never again be allowed to overwhelm the world. But how? The answer was hidden deep within the spiral, at the very heart of the energy that flowed through the land. Thessaly closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself. The spiral pulsed through her veins, filling her with power, with understanding. It was both a force of life and death, creation and destruction. To protect it, she would need to embrace both sides. I can't do this alone, Thessaly whispered to herself, her voice filled with determination. She had Reiner, but they needed more. She needed to find the others, those who had felt the pull of the spiral and could help her face the hunger. Only together could they keep it contained. Opening her eyes, Thessaly felt the presence of Reiner behind her, his steady gaze upon her. He stepped forward, his expression grave. We've come this far, Thessaly. But the deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes. The spiral is not just a force to be protected. It is a living entity. It can evolve, it can change. And if the hunger is allowed to grow again, nothing will stop it from consuming everything. Thessaly turned to face him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had known this all along, but hearing it aloud made it even more real. They couldn't stop now. The journey had only just begun. We need to go deeper, Thessaly said, her voice steady. To the heart of the spiral. It's the only way to stop the hunger for good. Reiner nodded, his expression unreadable. I will follow you, Thessaly. But we must be careful. The deeper we go, the more the spiral will test us. And the hunger will try to take hold of us. Together, they began walking forward, through the arch, into the heart of the spiral. The air grew thicker with energy, the very ground beneath their feet pulsing with the force of the spiral's raw power. Every step felt as though they were diving deeper into the very heart of existence, into the core of time itself. The trees around them seemed to move, bending and twisting as if alive, as though they were part of the spiral's very fabric. As they ventured further, the world around them began to shift. The sky above darkened, swirling with storm clouds that seemed to pulse with the energy of the spiral. The earth trembled beneath their feet, as though the land itself were reacting to their presence. Thessaly could feel the spiral growing more restless, more chaotic. The hunger was stirring, and it wasn't content to stay dormant. Reiner stopped suddenly, his hand raised. We're close, he said, his voice tense. But we're not alone. Thessaly froze, her senses heightening as she reached for the pendant around her neck. The spiral's energy was surging through her, and she could feel something else, something dark, something hungry, lurking just beneath the surface. Before she could react, the air around them seemed to snap, and a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark robes, its face obscured by a hood. But even though the figure was hidden, Thessaly could feel the power emanating from it, a force that sent a chill down her spine. You should not have come here, the figure said, its voice deep and cold, echoing with the darkness of the spiral. The hunger is awakening, and you have come to feed it? Thessaly's heart skipped a beat. Who are you? She demanded, stepping forward, her hand clenched into a fist. What do you want with the spiral? The figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent a ripple of fear through her. I am no mere figure, Thessaly. I am the embodiment of the hunger you seek to control. I am the one who was born from the spiral, the one who carries its true nature within. You freed it, and now it is mine. Thessaly's chest tightened as she realized the truth. The figure before her was no mere messenger or agent of the hunger, it was the hunger itself, alive and fully awakened. Reiner stepped forward, his expression hardening. You are not the hunger, he said, his voice filled with authority. You are a fragment of it. A manifestation of the chaos that lurks within the spiral. But you are not its true form. The figure tilted its head, a smile creeping across its shadowed face. True form? Ha! You fool! The hunger is the spiral's most primal force. It is time, it is death, it is everything that is lost, forgotten, and destroyed. I am the end of all things, and you cannot stop me. Thessaly's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she felt the power of the hunger pressing in around her. It was stronger than anything she had ever felt before, an overwhelming force that threatened to consume her entire being. But she refused to give in. The energy of the spiral surged through her, filling her with strength. The pendant pulsed brightly around her neck, its light pushing back against the dark energy of the hunger. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You are not the end," she said, her voice unwavering. "You are part of the spiral, but you do not control it. I freed the spiral, and I will guide it, not let it destroy everything in its wake." The figure snarled, its dark form shifting and writhing like smoke. "You cannot stop me, Thessaly." The spiral was never meant to be controlled. It is a force that cannot be contained. And now, it will consume you, just as it has consumed everything before. With a surge of energy, the figure lunged at her, its dark tendrils reaching for her, but Thessaly raised her hand, channeling the spiral's power. The light from her pendant burned brighter than ever, and the energy of the spiral clashed with the darkness of the hunger. The battle between light and dark raged in the heart of the spiral, the two forces locked in a struggle for control. Thessaly stood at the center, her will unyielding, her resolve firm. She had freed the spiral, and now she would protect it no matter the cost. The final act, the last choice. The battle between light and darkness had reached its peak. Thessaly stood at the heart of the spiral, her body trembling with the weight of the power flowing through her. The battle had been fierce, the hunger relentless, its dark tendrils twisting through the very fabric of the spiral, threatening to devour everything in its path. But Thessaly had not given up. She had embraced the spiral's power, not as a force of destruction, but as a force of creation. And now, as the final confrontation loomed before her, she knew that everything she had fought for was coming to an end. The figure of the hunger stood before her, its dark form shifting and flickering like smoke. It was the manifestation of everything that had once corrupted the spiral, a force born of chaos, of fear, and of destruction. And now, it was trying to consume everything she had worked to protect. Thessaly's hand tightened around the pendant at her chest, the symbol of the spiral glowing faintly, its power radiating through her. She had freed the spiral, but in doing so, she had awakened something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The hunger was not just a force of darkness. It was a part of the spiral, a necessary component of its being. But it had been twisted, corrupted, and now it threatened to tear everything apart. "You cannot control me, Thessaly," the hunger hissed, its voice cold and filled with malice. "I am the end of all things." The spiral was never meant to be free. It was meant to be bound, to be kept in check. And now that you have freed it, it will consume you and everything else. Thessaly took a deep breath, her body steady despite the overwhelming presence of the hunger. She had come this far. She had faced the darkness, the chaos, and the corruption of the spiral. She had freed it, yes, but she had also understood it. The spiral was not just a force of creation. It was a force of destruction, of balance. And she, Thessaly, was its guardian. "I will not let you destroy everything," Thessaly said, her voice unwavering. I freed the spiral not to control it, but to restore it. To let it evolve. But you have twisted it, corrupted it. The hunger roared, its form flickering violently as it surged forward. You cannot stop me, it snarled, its voice filled with rage. The spiral belongs to me. It always has. You are nothing but a fool who thought you could tame it. Thessaly's heart raced, but she stood firm. The power of the spiral surged through her, its energy filling her body with light. She could feel it, pulsing within her, stronger than ever before. But she also felt the darkness of the hunger, the fear, the temptation to give in, to let it take over. The final choice had arrived. She closed her eyes, reaching deep inside herself. She could feel the spiral's energy, its light, its power. She could feel the hunger, its darkness, its destructive force. But she also felt something else, something she had always known, something that had always been a part of her. The spiral was not just a force to be controlled. It was a force to be understood. And Thessaly, in that moment, understood what needed to be done. She raised her hand, her voice filled with conviction. I choose balance, she said, her words echoing through the very fabric of the spiral. I choose the spiral as it was meant to be, a force of creation, of life, of time. I will not let you consume everything, hunger. I will not let you destroy the world. The hunger screamed in fury, its form flickering violently, its dark energy swirling around Thessaly. But she did not falter. She reached deep within herself, channeling the full power of the spiral. The energy surged through her, and with it, she could feel the darkness of the hunger begin to unravel. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Time itself seemed to stop, the forces of creation and destruction locked in an eternal struggle. But Thessaly did not hesitate. She had made her choice. She had chosen balance. She had chosen to restore the spiral, to guide it, not to control it. With a final, determined breath, Thessaly released the energy within her. The spiral's light exploded around her, the darkness of the hunger dissipating like smoke in the wind. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the power of the spiral, its energy flowing freely once more, restored to its natural state. The forest around her began to heal. The twisted trees straightened, their branches reaching for the sky. The sky above cleared, the dark clouds dissipating, replaced by the soft light of dawn. The earth beneath her feet settled, the energy of the spiral now flowing in harmony with the world around her. Thessaly fell to her knees, her body exhausted, her mind reeling from the force of the energy she had unleashed. She had done it. She had faced the hunger, and she had restored the spiral to its true form. But the battle was not over. She knew that there would always be those who sought to control the spiral. There would always be darkness lurking in the shadows. But Thessaly had made her choice. She had chosen to protect the spiral, not as a keeper, but as its guardian. and she would fight, not to control it, but to guide it to ensure that it never again fell into the hands of destruction. The future was uncertain, but Thessaly knew that she would face it with the power of the spiral at her side, its light guiding her toward the path of balance. And with that, she stood, her gaze unwavering, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The spiral was hers to protect, and she would do so with everything she had.